Hello, this is Yvonne Minier speaking, and I'm going to talk to you today about using EQStitch in a way that is a little bit untraditional. We're going to be using EQStitch to work with a block, a pieced block, and turning it into embroidery designs. So we're going to start by clicking on our EQStitch icon on our desktop to launch the program. The first thing that comes up is the tip of the day, and we're just going to close that. And I want to create a new project, so I'm going to name this video 3-pieced block. And then I'm going to say OK. Now I know that my project is named because in the upper left hand corner of my screen the new name video 3-piece block shows up. So everything that I draw at this time will be saved in that project file. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get a pieced block from the library that I can turn into embroidery designs. So I'm going to go to my libraries, block library, and in the EQ7 libraries there is the first option 01 is classic pieced. And I'm going to go down to the classics, and then I'm going to scroll over and I'm going to choose the friendship star. Once I select it, I say add to sketchbook, and then I close the libraries. Now I know that the pieced block is a block, it's not a stitching. I'm going to click on the block work table. I'm going to go into my sketchbook and open it. Under the blocks tab, there's my friendship star. I'll click on it to select it, and then I'm going to say edit, and it's put it on the easy draw block work table. I don't want the drawing at this time. I want to use this as an image. So I'm going to click on the color tab, and there we have the full coloring of the block. I want to be able to take this block and turn it into an image that I can bring into the stitching block work table to create an embroidered block. So I'm going to go File and go down to Export Image. So it's going to take this image I have on the screen and it's going to export it. I'm just going to put it on my desktop for now, and I'm just going to type friendship block, and it automatically saves it as a Windows bitmap. You can change it to JPEG or whatever you want, but Windows bitmap will work just fine, and I'm going to say save. Now it asks me the size of my block. I can just leave it at this, or I can resize it. It will also resize when I bring it onto my stitching work table. I'm not going to worry about that. I do want to have my patches and the block outlined. It just gives me a visual so I can see what I'm tracing. So I'm just going to leave this as is and say OK. Now I'm just going to minimize my EQ screen here, and sure enough there is my friendship block on my desktop. So I'll open it back up again. Now I want to work with the embroidery functions of the program, so I'm going to click on the stitching work table, and I'm first going to create this as a new design embroidery. So that means it's all going to be embroidery stitches at this time. I'm going to click on the Tracing Image tab at the bottom of the screen, and then I'm going to import the image, and by pushing on this icon here on the upper left, then I can go to wherever it is on my computer that I have my image. Now I just placed it on the desktop. I know it's there, so I'm just going to scroll down through the icons for my desktop, and there's my friendship block. Now click on it to select it and say open. Now I have a screen that comes open, and I can crop and resize the image. I can make it lighter or darker. I can do all kinds of things. I'm just going to leave that for now. I'm just going to say OK, and then I'm going to take this little cursor and move it to the upper left hand corner and click, and it's now placed it on my image tab so I can see it. From here I can make it darker or lighter, whatever I want, in order to be able to see it in the background to trace it. I'm going to click on the Artwork tab, and this is where I'm going to start to design this friendship block as an embroidery. So I'm going to start with the center of the block. I'm going to use my tool here that looks like a triangle. I'm going to click and hold, and I'll get the flyout menu, and I'm going to click on the square. I'm going to move my cursor over, and I'm going to click and drag this square onto the center of the page so I can see exactly where that is. It lines up with the square block, the center of the block, the friendship block in the center. Now I need to add these triangular shapes. I'm not going to use the polygon tool to use the triangle. I want to change it a little bit, so I'm going to draw it myself. I'm going to click on the line drawing tool. I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to click down and release, draw over, release, click and drag to the top, and release. So there's my triangle. Now I want to check and make sure that this is a closed patch. When I draw it, if I don't line up my starting point and my ending point, I won't have a closed patch, and therefore it won't fill. So I just want to double check. So I'm going to click on the shape tool, click on anywhere on the triangle, and if I hover my cursor over one of the nodes, it tells me this is a middle corner with 3 curves and it is closed, and that is indeed what I want to have. Now right now you can see that this bottom edge of the triangle is directly on top of the square. This can cause a little bit of trouble when we go to fill stitches. The program doesn't usually like to have lines that are over the top of each other. So I'm going to resize this one just a bit to make it a little bit smaller. So I'm going to click on the pick tool, click on the block, on the triangle, and I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller. And as you can see, there's a slight gap here now from this triangle to the edge of my square, and that's fine. That little tiny bit of a gap is indeed exactly what I want to have. Now all I need to do is click on the triangle shape, click on clone, move it down over here to this area, and I am going to flip it and flip it again. Oops, sorry, flip it like that. And then I'm going to line it up. And again, I want to leave that little gap there. I'm going to copy, move it over to the other side. I want to flip it and side to side and up and down. And again, click and move it over, select it and move it. And one more time, clone, move it down to the bottom, flip it from side to side and top to bottom. Oops, side to side. There we go. And then place it with that little bit of a gap in there. Now again, the reason I leave a little bit of a gap is because I know the program will give me a bit of an issue if I try to lay the lines directly over each other. So now I've created a friendship star. I'm going to the Stitch tab, and I'm going to fill each one of those areas, and I'll just fill it with a smooth stitch for the moment. So I have clicked on the set fill stitch, and I've selected this smooth stitch. I'm just going to go around and fill these areas. Now notice how parts of it are disappearing. That's because there's an area around each of those shapes that's filling, and it's just extending into the other area. All I need to do is refresh my screen. So I go up at the top and I click on the little magnifying glass that has an equal sign on it, and that refreshes it so I can see all my pieces. And again, you can see the little gap in there. Now, I don't want an outline on this, so I'm going to click on the Set Edge Stitch. I'm going to go up to the Properties toolbar at the top, and I'm going to turn it off so there's no stitch. And then I'm going to go around and click on each one of the patches to remove the edge stitch that was there. Now, I can see a little bit of it. I'm just going to refresh my screen one more time, and now it turns out perfectly. So I have all the elements of a friendship star. I want to color it, so I'm going to click on the Set Thread tool. I'll pick yellow. I like to pick a bright color at this stage because I can see my stitches. Now all my stitches are the same. They're all going in the same direction. It's very plain and flat looking. I'm going to go back to my Set Fill Stitch icon. I'm going to click on the corn row going one way and apply it. Click on the corn row the opposite direction and apply it, and then I'm going to do a, what's this one? A zigzag stitch in the center. So now I can see that I have 3 different distinct types of fills. What I want you to notice is this is very close to the outside edge of my hoop page. I don't want it quite that close. I'd like to have it set in just a bit. If I have it too close to the edge, although it looks good on my screen, I might get an error message when I go to open it on my machine. It'll say it's too large. So I'm just going to go back and click on the Artwork tab, and I'm going to say Edit, Select All, and I'm just going to reduce it in size. Now I can click on this handle and drag it in, but I want it to be symmetrical both from top to bottom and left to right. So I'm going to right click and say Resize, and I'm going to set it at about 95%, just so I'm absolutely certain that all of the elements will be inside the page. So I'll say OK, make sure it's centered. Go back to your stitch tab, and you can see now it fits well within the parameters of the hoop area. And I would add that to my sketchbook. Now you can start to play around with it a little bit. You can make it more fanciful by changing the colors of each of the edges, just to give it a little more definition and flavor and fun. It can make it a more unique design rather than your traditional friendship star. You still have the shape, but you also have all the color options in there too. And this will, because of the thickness of the thread dimension, you will probably find as it's stitching that this gap actually closes in and they end up side by side. Now you must do a test sew to see how this is actually going to work. If indeed when you're test sewing there's still a gap and you don't want a gap, all you do is go back to your Artwork tab, select your elements, and move them just a little bit closer into the center block. So that is one way to make your friendship star block into an image and turn it into stitches. Now you can also play with it a little bit. You can turn on the edge stitches to start with. So I've clicked on the set edge stitch. I'm now going to set a steel stitch, and I'm just going to click around them to apply the steel stitch. Now this is being applied at the default setting, which is 3 millimeters wide. I find that a bit wide. There's a lot of overlap in here, and you can see it's because of the width of the stitch, it's sticking outside the hoop area. So I'm going to take this and make it 2 millimeters and apply that to each of the edges. And I can from here color all of those. I can click on the spray can once I've selected a color, and they're all one color, all in one stroke, and I can add that to my sketchbook. I can change this yet again by going back to my set fill icon, turning off the fill stitch, leaving the edge stitch, and I have yet another variation on the friendship star. I can send that to the sketchbook. Of course, I can do this as a quilt stitch, quilting my layers. I like the bean stitch, so I can click on, now I've clicked on to the set edge stitch, click on the bean stitch, go around and click on each one of those elements, refresh my screen, and you can see there's even another look to the same design. And I can add that to the sketchbook. Now this is all done with stitches. This is embroidery. What if we want to make it an applique? We can certainly do machine applique with this too. Now we do not have to redraw the whole thing. We can go back to our Artwork tab. We can take this drawing and we can say Edit, Select All, Edit, Copy. Now I want to set my machine applique setting, so I'm going to go Stitching, New Design, Machine Applique. Notice how the image is still in the background. I haven't deleted the image, it's just carried forward. Now all I do is I click on the pick tool, move it to the center of the screen, right click, paste, There's the design that we just copied. I'm going to center it again. Now from here we can create it as an applique. And click on the Fabric tab, and we can add fabric to our elements, and then click on Stitch and go to the Applique, Set Applique Edge, and here we can pick either the steel stitch, which is already the default, or we can click on the E-stitch. And the E-stitch, again, we can make this light or dense. We can take away the center of the E. Let's take away the center and let's just make it like a blanket stitch. So I'm going to set my adjust percent to 0. I'm going to make it a little bit wider so I can see it a little bit easier. And I like a lot of spacing with my blanket stitch. So I'm going to set this to 8 millimeters. And I'm going to have it about 95% to the inside. So 95% of this E-stitch will stitch into the fabric, and the other 5% will be just outside the edge. So now I just click on each of these elements to apply it. And there's a blanket stitch. Now you can also see the tack down stitch and the placement line. Those won't show so much. When I click on the zoom at the top and then I click and drag around an area, I can zoom in. So this is your placement line, which will be under the fabric. This is your tack down line, which is on top of the fabric, and this is your edge stitch. And you can see that the edge of this blanket stitch or E-stitch is right along the cut edge of the fabric. There's no gap. You can have the tack down line the same color thread as your fabric so it doesn't show as much, or what one member suggested is that when you're doing this tack down line, you can use a wash away thread in your needle, and after you've stitched it in place and added your final edge stitch, you can wash this away in here and you won't have any inside stitch showing at all. So let's go back out, let's adjust it to fit back to our work table, and let's just color these elements just to see what we can get there. So that's what we'll have. Now, this, because we resized it to be 95% of the original size, it is still within the hoop parameters. When you use a large satin stitch, it might stick out. So you will need to watch that carefully on the edge. But now we've created an applique. Let's change this back to a satin stitch. So we're going to go back to our edge stitch. We're going to go back to our zigzag or satin stitch or steel stitch, however you refer to it. And we're going to set them back again. And there is your satin stitch. Now I have this 95% inside still from when I did my E-stitch. I don't want to have that set back there. This width is a bit wide. So I'm going to refresh this and I'm going to say restore the settings. Just by clicking this little blue arrow, restores the settings, goes back to 75.4, and when I reapply that, there is your traditional satin stitch or zigzag stitch. And you can see, because this is quite wide, it definitely fills that gap. But look what it's doing here. Again, it's starting to extend beyond the edge of the hoop. So I want to resize that one more time. So I'll go into my artwork. I'll do Edit, Select All. And again, I want to keep it symmetrical. So I'm just going to right click, resize, and let's make this, yeah, we'll leave it at 95%. So it's going to make it 95% less than what's already there. So we'll say OK. Brings it in yet further. When we go back to our stitch tab, you can see it's now well within inside the edges of the hoop. So that's another way to do it. Certainly you can change your fabrics. Oh, let's go back to stitch and let's add that to our sketchbook. We'll go back to the fabric tab. Of course, you can change your elements here to whatever colors you want, just to add some more interest. Now remember, this is all still the same design. We're simply changing it up by changing fabrics and elements as we go along. Go back to our stitch tab, And this time, let's change the colors. And we're going to do each one separate. So I can't use the spray can. I'm going to use the paintbrush tool. And I'm going to color each one the color of the fabric itself. So these are some colors I've used before, so they're still readily available to me. So I'm just clicking on them and bringing them over. And there we go. There's yet another way to make this friendship star look a little bit different, a little unique. So let's add that to the sketchbook. There's one more thing that you can do with this that's fun. You can go back to the artwork tab and you can select all but one of the elements and delete them. So I'm just going to save one of the triangles. I'll save the one at the top. I'm going to click on it to select it. I'm going to go to my wreath maker tool. I'm going to tell it to make 4 elements. And 50% is good. It's going to have a little bit of spacing showing between them. And I'm going to say OK. And now I'm not going to add fabric. I'm just going to make this stitches for something fun and different. And again, we can take these stitches and make them different colors. And this is sort of a stylized kind of friendship star. You get the idea that it's kind of a star shape, but it's kind of funky looking because of just the edge stitches that we have used. And you can save that to your sketchbook also. When you're ready, you can open your sketchbook and pull up any one of the stitchings that you just created. These are embroidery designs. If I right click and select stitching, there's all the different stitchings that I did of this. If I go to the applique settings, right click, select stitching, there's the color variations there. And this one, select stitching, and it shows the color variations in there. So you can open any one of those, put those back onto your design work table, and from here you would send it out to create an embroidery design. So if I was happy with this one and wanted to stitch this one, I would now go to stitching, export stitching file. FAF is what comes up. I don't have a FAF machine, I have a Brother machine. So I would say save it as a Brother, and I will name this my friendship star. And because I have a lot of stars, I might say this is friendship star number 1. And the default for the program is to save it into the EMB folder. And I just say save. It's asking me, do I want to color sort? Not on this design, I don't. So I'll say no. And it's successfully written as a file that my machine can read. So you can take a traditional block that's built into the library and create whatever you want with that by simply making it a tracing image and then adding your details as you go along through the program. So I hope you enjoy this, that you're learning how to use traditional blocks in untraditional ways by working with the EQStitch program. Enjoy the process. Let us know how it turns out for you.